The village of Bakassi was alive with excitement, buzzing with the news of the upcoming wedding between Aitoro and Edom. It was the most anticipated event of the year, a grand affair that had everyone talking. Etim, a wealthy and well-respected young man, had only recently come to the village, quickly becoming the dream of every girl. Yet, to everyone's surprise, he chose Aitoro, a woman known for her beauty and unattainability. Many men had pursued her, showering her with gifts and wealth, yet none had succeeded in winning her heart. Now, she was set to marry one of the richest men in the village, and she couldn't have been happier. Her mother, Ait, was just as thrilled, constantly reminding her daughter that she had played her cards well, securing the most desirable husband. Aitoro, eager to be the center of admiration, spent days preparing for her wedding, indulging in beauty treatments to ensure she was the most breathtaking bride the village had ever seen. The wedding day arrived, and Aitoro's family compound was transformed into a scene of celebration. Canopies were set up, and villagers gathered in droves, eager to witness the union. Food and drinks flowed freely, and laughter filled the air. Etim arrived with his family, the ceremony beginning with traditional rites. When the time came for Aitoro to present a cup of wine to her groom, she stepped out, radiant in her bridal attire, a vision of elegance. Gasps filled the air as the villagers marveled at her beauty, her grace undeniable. She danced toward her uncle, who handed her the ceremonial cup, signaling her to take it to her future husband. Just as she turned to offer the drink to Etim, a deep male voice cut through the crowd. "My gorgeous wife," the voice declared confidently. Before Aitoro could react, a man emerged, snatching the cup from her hands and drinking from it. In the blink of an eye, he swept her into his arms and carried her away. The villagers gasped, frozen in shock as the man and his accomplices forced their way through the crowd. Etim, stunned by the sudden turn of events, attempted to chase after them, but two large men blocked his path. Within moments, the mysterious man placed Aitoro into a waiting car, and they sped away, leaving chaos in their wake. Aitoro's mother collapsed in agony, screaming for help, while Etim stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. His family, embarrassed and enraged, walked away, leaving him standing there humiliated. The once joyous crowd slowly dispersed, whispering about the shocking abduction. Some recognized the man as someone who had been seen in the village before, a mysterious figure who had a past connection to Toro. The entire village buzzed with speculation. Who was this man, and what did he want with the bride? Udak had been more than just a passing figure in Aitoro's life. He had been her family's lifeline for years. When her father fell gravely ill, it was Udak who covered the expensive medical bills, ensuring that he received the best treatment possible. When he eventually passed away, Udak single-handedly financed the funeral, taking care of every last detail. To the villagers, he was a family friend, a good Samaritan who had stepped in when Aitoro's family needed help the most. But for Udak, his generosity was never just an act of kindness. It was an investment, a down payment for a future with Aitoro as his wife. He had showered her with gifts, supported her mother, and given her everything she ever needed, believing that one day she would recognize his devotion and choose him. Instead, she had disregarded him completely, treating his presence in her life as nothing more than a convenience. When he heard about her wedding to Etim, a man who had never lifted a finger for her family, Udak snapped. He refused to let her walk down the aisle with another man after everything he had done. That's why he showed up on her wedding day not as a guest, but as a man ready to take what he believed was rightfully his. When Udak brought Aitoro to a distant village, he didn't harm her, nor did he keep her in miserable conditions. He provided her with everything she needed: food, clothing, and shelter. But for Aitoro, none of that mattered. All she wanted was her freedom, and she begged Udak to let her go. Desperation filled her voice as she offered him money, promising that Edom would pay him any amount he demanded. Udak simply laughed, finding amusement in the idea that she thought she could buy her way out of this. "My lovely wife," he told her, "you are already home." The reality of the situation sank in, and Aitoro's fear turned to anger. She lashed out at him, cursing him for ruining her wedding and insulting him for believing she ever owed him anything. But Udak had reached his breaking point. He erupted in rage, shouting at her to be quiet. "You and your mother thought you could take my money and toss me aside like garbage? I like garbage?" He bellowed. "For years I took care of you. I gave your family everything. And you thought you could just marry another man like I never existed?" Aitoro, still trembling, tried to reason with him, claiming she never knew he had expectations, but Udak wasn't buying it. He reminded her of the countless times he had spoken about marriage, of the promises she had made to think about it. Yet when a richer man, days passed and Aitoro remained trapped, pleading for a way out. She offered Udak everything she could think of: money, favors, anything that would make him release her. Finally, Udak gave her a single condition. If she allowed him to sleep with her, he would let her go. Without hesitation, Aitoro agreed, seeing no other option. The next morning, true to his word, Udak arranged for someone to take her back to her mother's house. When she arrived, her mother was overwhelmed with relief, embracing her daughter as if she had returned from the dead. But when Aitoro told her mother how she had secured her freedom, the relief quickly turned into disappointment. "You fool," Aid scolded her. "You should have waited. That man wouldn't have hurt you. He loves you. If you had held out longer, he would have gotten tired and let you go anyway." Aitoro, still shaken by the ordeal, argued that she had no other choice, but her mother refused to listen. "Now you've made a terrible mistake," she continued. "What if you get pregnant? We can't take that risk. You need to go to Etim right away and make sure he sleeps with you. That way, if you are pregnant, you can make him believe the child is his." Aitoro, exhausted and defeated, knew she had no choice but to follow her mother's instructions. That same night, she made her way to Etiem's house, determined to carry out her mother's plan. Aitoro arrived at Etiem's house that night, desperate to fix the damage Udak had caused. She knew that if she didn't act fast, her entire future would be ruined. When Etiem opened the door and saw her, he was shocked. He had assumed she was still missing, or worse. He immediately pulled her inside, asking her what had happened. Aitoro, prepared for this moment, gave him the story her mother had instructed her to tell. She claimed that the man who kidnapped her was her late father's business partner, a trusted family friend who had secretly harbored feelings for her. She told Etiem that she never suspected he had any ulterior motives until the day of the wedding when he suddenly took her away. She added that, thankfully, the next morning, Aitoro woke up more determined than ever. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She needed Edom to sleep with her before any rumors about Udak spread, before anyone had the chance to question where she had been. Again, she tried to get close to him using every trick she knew to entice him. But once again, Etiem resisted, telling her she needed time to recover. Aitoro felt panic rise in her chest. Her mother had warned her that if she didn't act quickly, everything would fall apart. That evening, she returned home and told Eit what had happened. Her mother, always thinking ahead, handed her a small packet of powder. "Put this in his food," she instructed. "He won't be able to resist you after that." Aitoro, though hesitant, knew she had no other choice. She went back to Etiem's house the next day, cooking him a delicious meal and secretly mixing in the substance. As they sat down to eat, Aitoro felt a sense of relief, believing her plan would finally work. But just as Etiem was about to take the first bite, there was a knock at the door. A neighbor stood outside, frantic. His pregnant wife was in labor, and he had no way to get her to the hospital. Without hesitation, Etiem jumped up to help, completely forgetting about the food. Aitoro, beyond frustrated, insisted on going with him, determined to make sure he came back to eat the meal she had prepared. As they left the hospital after safely dropping off the laboring woman, a familiar voice suddenly called out, "So this is the man you left me for, Aitoro?" She froze. Turning around, she saw Yudek standing nearby, a smug expression on his face. Aitoro stood frozen as she watched Itim drive away, her world crumbling before her eyes. She had played her last card, and she had lost card. And she had lost card. The weight of her mistake settled heavily on her chest as she slowly turned away, too ashamed to even cry. She couldn't return to Edim's house, not after what had just happened. Instead, she walked aimlessly through the village, hoping for a miracle, hoping that somehow this nightmare could be undone. But deep down, she knew it couldn't. When she finally arrived home, her mother was waiting for her, arms crossed, impatience written all over her face. "Well," Eat demanded, "did you do it?" Aitoro could barely meet her mother's gaze. "He found out everything," she whispered. Yudak told him, and I admitted it. For the first time, Eight looked genuinely shocked. "You admitted it?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You actually admitted it? What kind of fool are you, Aitoro?" She threw her hands in the air in frustration. "You've ruined everything." Aitoro, exhausted and defeated, collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. "Mother, what was I supposed to do? He forced me to say it, but Eight was unmoved. Then you should have lied. Do you think men like Edium will forgive something like this? You should have fought harder." Eight paced the room, fuming, but Aitoro barely heard her. All she could think about was how quickly her life had unraveled. Just days ago, she was about to marry a wealthy man, the envy of every woman in the village. Now, she had nothing, no husband, no security, no future. But Eat was not one to wallow in defeat. She stopped pacing and turned sharply to her daughter. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "Eatim is gone. You can cry about it later. Right now, you need to think about what's next. There were plenty of men chasing after you before, weren't there? Find one of them. Find one of them quickly." Aitoro wiped her tears, barely able to comprehend what her mother was suggesting. "That mother, no buts," Eight interrupted. "You will not sit in this house and waste away. You're still beautiful, and there are still men out there who would give anything to have you. Use your head, Aitoro. Pick the wealthiest one and do whatever it takes to make him yours." Aitoro didn't have the energy to argue. She knew her mother well enough to understand that there was no point, and maybe, just maybe, her mother was right. If she moved fast enough, she could still secure a future for herself. She thought about the men who had once fought for her attention, and one name came to mind of Ong. He had always adored her, always wanted her. If she played her cards right, she could convince him to marry her. The next morning, Aitoro dressed carefully and made her way to Ofong's house, rehearsing her words in her mind. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, surprise flashed across his face, but he quickly masked it. "Itoro," he said evenly. "To what do I owe this visit?" She smiled sweetly, stepping inside. "I just wanted to see you," she said, letting her voice take on a softness she knew men liked. Avung studied her for a moment, then smirked. "You want to see me now, huh?" After running off to marry another man? Aitoro swallowed her pride. "That was a mistake," she admitted. "I see things clearly now. You were always the one who truly cared about me," Avung chuckled, but he didn't push her away. That was all the encouragement she needed. Over the next few weeks, she devoted herself to him, making sure they spent every moment together, making sure that he was completely under her spell. But deep down, she knew she couldn't rely on just one man. Secretly, she also started seeing another Udium just in case things with Aom didn't work out. It was a dangerous game, but she was willing to do whatever it took to secure her future. Then one morning, she woke up feeling nauseous. A slow dread filled her as she realized the truth: she was pregnant. But whose child was it? Udak's of Ung's or Udam's? Panic settled in as she realized she had no idea. Aitoro sat alone in her small room, staring blankly at the wall as the weight of her situation pressed down on her. She was pregnant and she had no idea who the father was. The thought made her stomach churn with anxiety. Udak, Afong, Udem, any one of them could be responsible, yet none of them were men she could count on. She had spent the last few weeks carefully playing her game, making sure she had options, but now it had all backfired. Instead of securing a future, she had only trapped herself deeper in uncertainty. Her mother's words echoed in her mind: find a wealthy man and make him yours. That had been her plan all along, but now things were more complicated. She needed to move quickly before the pregnancy became obvious. That morning, she dressed carefully and went straight to Ofong's house. She greeted him with a bright smile and sat beside him, holding his hand gently. "Avong," she began softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her curiously, waiting. "I'm carrying your child," she announced, watching for his reaction. But instead of joy or excitement, a smirk spread across his face. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, amusement in his voice. "Because I know for a fact that I can't get anyone pregnant." The words hit Aitoro like a slap. She blinked, trying to process what he had just said. "What do you mean?" she stammered. Afung chuckled. "I have a medical condition," he said casually. "I can perform, but I can't father children. So, Aitoro, whatever game you're playing, I suggest you find someone else to trap." Toro's body went cold. This wasn't happening. Afung had been her best chance, the man she had counted on to save her from this mess. Now, that plan had crumbled before her eyes. She felt her breath quicken as panic set in, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had one more option, Udem. She quickly left Avong's house and made her way to Udem, determined to make him believe the baby was his. But as soon as she arrived, she saw the look of disgust on his face. "I heard everything," Udem spat before she could even speak. "I was at Ofong's place when you told him the same thing." "Do you really think I'm not stupid?" Aitoro's heart dropped. She had been caught. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he continued. "You've played too many games, Aitoro. Now you're all alone." He shook his head in disappointment and turned away, leaving her standing there humiliated. Aitoro barely made it home before breaking down into tears. Her mother was waiting for her, arms crossed, impatience written all over her face. "So?" he demanded. "What happened?" Aitoro sobbed harder, unable to speak. "Don't tell me you lost both of them," her mother snapped, her frustration clear. When Aitoro nodded, 8 let out a loud, angry sigh. "You useless girl. How could you let this happen?" She shook her head in disgust. "I raised a fool. Now you will bear this child alone because you failed to secure a husband." Aitoro could barely breathe as the reality sank in. She had no one, no man to claim the child, no future to look forward to. The villagers had already started whispering about her, and soon she would be the shame of the entire village. Her mother gave her one last glare before walking away, muttering, "You will not give birth in my house." Aitoro felt like the walls were closing in. She had played the game for too long, and now it had destroyed her. A year had passed, and Aitoro's life had become a daily struggle. She had given birth to a baby girl, but instead of joy, her mother treated her with resentment. He barely acknowledged the child, making it clear that she saw her granddaughter as nothing more than a burden. Aitoro, once the most admired woman in the village, now lived in shame, abandoned by the very men she had once thought she could manipulate. She had no husband, no financial stability, and no respect from the community. The same villagers who used to envy her now whispered about her behind her back, calling her a cautionary tale. She had lost everything, and worst of all, she had done it to herself. Each day, she struggled to provide even the simplest necessities for her child, relying on small tasks in the market and whatever scraps of food her mother would allow her. But Eat's coldness only grew. When Aitoro's sister returned to the village, driving a car and heavily pregnant, the contrast between their lives became painfully obvious. Mom had chosen love and loyalty over wealth, and in the end, she was the one who truly prospered. When saw her sister suffering, she was filled with sadness. Despite everything, she still loved Aitoro and wanted to help her. She gave her money to start a small business, hoping she could rebuild her life. But their mother, still clinging to her old ways, refused to let Aitoro touch any of the gifts brought by Emian and her husband. "You made your bed," Eight told her coldly. "Now lie in it." Aitoro felt the sting of those words, but she was too exhausted to fight. She held her child close, the only thing she had left in the world, and for the first time, she truly understood the weight of her mistakes. She had spent years believing that beauty and charm could secure her future, that men were nothing more than stepping stones to a better life. But now she realized the truth: real success comes from character, not deception. She had manipulated, schemed, and played games, thinking she was in control, but in the end, it was those very games that had destroyed her. Toro's story is one that happens more often than people like to admit. Many chase after quick success, believing they can take shortcuts through life by using others. But true prosperity doesn't come from deceit, it comes from hard work, integrity, and the right choices. Aitoro lost everything because she built her life on lies, and when those lies collapsed, she had nothing left to stand on. Meanwhile, the sister she once mocked for choosing